So you say you were good, but not good enough to make your conference championship game. Teams like Tennessee, Ohio State, who fumbled the bag, Miami, all not good enough to be playing this weekend. But they hope that their resume will be strong enough to crack the top 12 and make the playoffs. We, of course, are waiting for the latest rankings to drop tonight. And this is how it looked last week as we got set for everything. But if you're in red, that means you lost, and you might not be sitting too pretty. Ohio State, Miami, and Clemson all taking L's and all taking that destiny maybe not in their hands as we move forward. The Dodd father, Dennis Dodd, joining us now. And Dennis, I think we're really excited to see how the committee treats the rankings coming out tonight, because when you look at schools from the SEC, you look at the Tennessees, the Ole Misses, the Alabamas, who will not be playing for the conference championship game, same with Miami. How much do you think the way the rankings will look tonight for where these teams sit will be the same way it'll look next week? In other words, if you're in that top 12 today, you'll be feeling good about your chances to make the playoff overall.
Yeah, Zach, that's a good point. Bit of breaking news here on that topic. Look at the teams that are not playing, that their seasons are complete. You just mentioned them all. Miami, South Carolina, Alabama, Ole Miss, maybe SMU if they end up losing. These teams whose seasons are over historically do not move from the final CFP rankings, which would be tonight. Obviously, Sunday is Selection Sunday. They have moved, those teams have moved at all once in the 10-year history of the CFP. That comes from Jerry Palm. It happened in 2014. Mississippi State and Michigan State swapped places. Meaningless. But tonight, if you see Miami in, if you see Alabama in, if you see Ole Miss or South Carolina in that top 12 or hovering around it, they're in, at least historically. And if they're not, then the committee's got some explaining to do, because they finished their season. Why should they be penalized either way for, their seasons being over and teams leaping them? The committee can do whatever it wants, but I think that's the headline tonight. If those teams are in or around the top 12, they're going to be in on Sunday.
Do you think that will hold true? Like, can we take it to the bank and think that history will repeat itself? And if you are a Miami and you come in at 10, will they make it into the playoffs?
That's the question, Zach, and it's a very good question, because those examples I just mentioned were in a 14 playoff. It didn't matter who finished below 4. Okay, we finished 6th, 7th, 8th. We're talking about playoff spots. We're talking about millions of dollars. We're talking about access. We're basically talking about the ACC versus the SEC. Those 3 SEC teams that I mentioned whose seasons are over all believe they're supposed to be in. They all put out little Twitter campaigns yesterday. The question is the committee going to pay any attention to that? And obviously they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be objective. But look, we're all from somewhere. We all root for somebody. So it's going to be interesting. We're writing about it this week because this is the ultimate example of that. And again, at the end of the day, I've said this for years, that committee can do whatever it wants. Throw everything else out the window. You've seen, I'm contradicting myself right now. But they can do whatever they want on Sunday.
It always feels like it's a battle between Big Ten and SEC for maybe who's going to reign supreme, who's going to have the most amount of teams to make it to the playoffs. How much along the same veins of what we just talked about will you be monitoring tonight between the balance of teams in the top 12 of the Big Ten and in the SEC for the amount of bids that they will receive into the playoffs?
Yeah, I think the Big Ten set. The Big Ten championship game is basically for seeding. It doesn't matter, at least from the 35,000-foot view, it doesn't matter who wins. Penn State is going to be in if they lose, and they're the underdog to Oregon. If they pull the upset, they will be Big Ten champions. Or Oregon will probably host a first-round game if they lose the game. Indiana is in. I think the conflict is with the SEC. Do they get 3 or do they get 4? And I just mentioned how that happens. That what happens if the ACC gets 2. And if that happens, if Clemson wins and takes the auto bid at 10-3, and SMU is sitting there at 11-2, having a fantastic season, now you're in a conflict if you're on the committee. Does getting to the championship game and leading the conference, really the second half of the season, is that better than those 3 SEC teams? And who out of those 2 out of those 3 or 3 out of those 4 get in? Is it going to be an outrage in SEC country if SMU gets in ahead of Alabama or Ole Miss or South Carolina? I think in that setting. South Carolina's out because they've lost to both Ole Miss and they've lost to Alabama. Only 2 points to Alabama. That doesn't make any difference. But all that's going to be in play when the SEC and Big Ten are measuring themselves every day of the year against each other and who's dominant. And in this first year of the CFP, that's going to be a thing.
And I think that certainly is a thing that we've made it to the part of the year where coaches are out there just drastically politicking for a spot to make it into the CFP. I know Lane Kiffin recently had a tweet that he put out on X of basically outlining the reasons of why Ole Miss should make the playoffs. And I remember reading this when he put it out here, Dennis, and thinking, okay, this makes a lot of sense. South Carolina lost to both of them, and they're the best. He goes on to essentially say that Ole Miss should be in the playoffs by his measure of reasoning. How much does this help at all? Is the committee thinking maybe along these lines of thought when they try to decide of who should go on and make it? Because he brings up some great points, Dennis.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant by him to put that out on Twitter. I talked to Rich Clark, who's the executive director of the CFP. I talked to Ward Manuel, who is the chairman of the selection committee, on Saturday at the Ohio State-Michigan game. And they reiterated to me that everybody puts their biases aside when they walk in. They do it symbolically. They have a hat, and they take it off and put it on a rack. But I also talked to Jeff Long, who was the first chair of the committee back in 2014, I think the first 3 years. And he said, we couldn't prevent what went on in the hallways, in the restrooms, around the buffet tables, but we could remind them in the room, don't take conference affiliation into account. But we are talking about the superpowers here. And they hold all the cards. The SEC, whether they get shut out or not, the SEC or Big Ten look like they're going to try some power play, as they did earlier this year, to try to get automatic qualifiers. In other words, 4 no matter what every year. Now, this year, may show that they don't deserve that. At least the SEC doesn't deserve it. But I think what they've done, we've never seen this before. After the Lane Kiffin tweet came out, I got a call from Mario Cristobal. Hey, did you see that? I said, I did. And I said, Mario, if you want to counter something, give me a call. By the end of the day, they had put out 3 tweets. Greg Byrne from Alabama, the AD, had put out an informational tweet on Alabama, very slickly produced. Does it make any difference? I think we'll see. I don't think it does, but there's a lot more at stake in this thing than there was previously because there's more teams and more money.
So you've got Mario Cristobal, you've got Lane Kiffin, you've got Brett Bielema, all the coaches out there across the country. Who would you want to be your champion, to be your coach, to be like, all right, be the voice of us of why we should make the CFP?
Yeah, I've got 2 answers. All time, I'd probably pick Bud Wilkinson. He had so much gravity or if there was such a room, he'd have gravity in that room, the old Oklahoma coach, maybe a Tom Osborne. Today, I'd have Nick Saban or Kirby Smart. Quick story about Kirby Smart. At the end of the SEC championship game last year in Atlanta, I was doing the losers locker room for CBS, and he saw me with the microphone. He was coming down the hall, and he goes like this. He crooks his finger, and he whispers in my ear, are you going to talk about the playoff? And I said, yeah, it's my first question. Because at that point, they were trying to campaign to get in. I asked it. He made his case. They didn't get in. But you better believe that these guys are thinking about it. And I think Kirby makes a great case. That's another one to think about. What if they lose to Texas in the SEC game? They've got a 3rd loss. How far do you drop Georgia? I think Kirby, that active coach, would probably be the best at that right now.
Yeah, so much to look forward to this weekend and so much to see tonight when the new CFP rankings come out. Dennis Dodd, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And, of course, that all leads up to this Saturday for championship weekend. And these are the notable games of all the teams will be playing for their conference championship games. And you see down there in the bottom left, Saturday at 8 Eastern, it's the Big Ten title game between Penn State and Oregon, airing on CBS, also streaming on Paramount+. Make sure you check that out this weekend.